Hello everybody and welcome to our webinar today on realising your firm's digital dividend. I'm Caroline Hill, I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Legal IT Insider, and I've got a great panel here for you today to discuss some of the key topics that we're going to be talking about. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do, as you join us, put your name in the chat, let us know who you are, where you're listening in from, and if you've got any questions. We've already got a question ahead of the panel chat, which I'll be reading out. So do make this interactive. We're keen to hear from you and for you to be involved. This is a topic related, or it's a thought leadership type session, and it would be really great to hear your views as we go through some of the topics, talking through some of the challenges affecting law firms today, how you're overcoming the challenges with more efficient technology processes and by looking after your people. And I love the fact that we're talking about people, because so often the people get missed out. I have on my panel Steve Turner, so IT and Facilities Director at GA Solicitors in Plymouth. I'm sure some of you are familiar with them, but they're a Southwest law firm advising on family law, divorce, employment, dispute resolution. The list goes on, doesn't it, Steve?
It does.
It's really nice to have you here today.
Thank you.
We're not going to do a weather report like we did before, but and then I have Kerri Dearing, VP of International at NetDocuments. Kerri's based in London, and NetDocuments doesn't really need an awful lot of introduction, I don't think. Hi, Kerri. You're on mute there, but it's fine. And then and last but not least, from Advanced, which is our webinar partner today, we have Global Sales Director Glenn Rhea. Hi, Glenn.
Hello, Caroline, and good afternoon, everyone, and those listening digitally.
Thanks very much for everyone for joining us. Thanks for saying hi. Hi, Ryan. Make sure if you want me to read out that you please put to everybody. That would be great, because sometimes if it says to hosts and panelists, I can still read it out, but I just won't say who you are. But if you want to get involved, make sure you change it to everybody, just so that I can read out any comments without. But by all means, if you want to address something just to us, that's absolutely fine. Unfortunately, I should mention that Phil Ord, who was joining us from Napthans, unfortunately can't be here, and we will miss him. But we have a full agenda, and knowing how talkative we all are, perhaps having just four of us isn't altogether a bad thing. So we're going to start off. So Glenn's going to run through talking you through some of the key topics around realising your digital dividend and what that means. I'm going to hand over to him, and then we'll have a discussion around some of the topics. So Glenn, I don't know if you want to kick us off, taking us through some slides and the topic.
I will, Caroline, thank you. And I'm just going to put that into presentation mode. So I'm hoping that my panelists can see that and confirm you can see that slide. Is that great? Fabulous. Well, thanks for the invite, Caroline. So I've got a few minutes to set the scene on what we really mean by realising your digital dividend. And really, I hope for this will inspire a bit of conversation for the rest of the hour that we've got together. So I'll start with just perhaps summary views, the challenges, if you like, that some firms might be thinking about around digital dividend. And then I'll comment on what do we mean by that and who's coined this phrase. So perhaps economically, while we're not in that technical recession, clearly the cost of living is impacting all of us. And whether that's changes to your utilities bills at home or the firm that you work with, the cost of travel, rent and premises, it's all affecting those financial goals that your board and your partnership might now have. So that's one of the challenges that are encouraging firms to think differently about perhaps some of the ways of working and technology that they're thinking about. And there's also a staff shortage issue, which I might not have thought about a couple of years ago. But we've got some research that showed that actually, while fees has actually increased on average in the last couple of years, the number of lawyers that's actually been hired in that same period hasn't grown in line with that, which kind of suggests that at least some firms are thinking more about doing more with less, more about productivity. And so how is that impacting that thinking around digital dividend? And talent wars, is this the most commonly coined phrase since COVID? I think I've got a bit bored of it myself, actually, but it still seems to be out there. I was reading The Lawyer last night, And it scared me to see that they were publishing NQs, certainly in the city, were being hired up to £180,000 as a starting salary, which I'm sure would terrify a lot of you, me included, but that's the reality of new staff demands. So that is a real issue. Not everybody can be paying those packages. And fewer firms, and perhaps this is one for the panel as we get into it. Is this different within certain regions in the UK, but there is some consolidation here and there? Is that to do with a land grab with regard to customer base, but is it also related to the financial challenges that we're facing in that profitability goal? So that's one for the panel that I'm interested to talk to. And this one, I think, will resonate with all of you around that client expectation. You know, how many of you as consumers expect to be able to self-serve yourselves when you're working with a firm, whether it's a conveyancing task or a private client piece of work? I've certainly been there, and I've got an anecdote that I can share right now that's for me, relative for me. But also that growing demand to have a strong ESG program, and certainly those larger end firms who are maybe listing, that's certainly something that investors expect these days, and in some cases your corporate customers too. So we'll perhaps talk a little bit about what ESG means. So picking out maybe some of the salient points here, Caroline and team. Look, investing in people, staff loyalty is obviously key to ensure that you can be as profitable as you can, and there's a bit more talk track I can share with that in a moment. But you know, what are those things you can do about it? Well, long-term incentive plans, flexible working have kind of become the norm. You would expect customer service to be front in mind, but is it that boardroom topic these days? It may be, it may not be, but it is very much culture-led. Reducing complaints and that customer advocacy is important. And you know, as a talking point today, how many firms out there might have a partner goal of cross-sell within their firm? We talk about it all the time, but how effective are we, and do we take responsibility for it? Time management, another one. You know, greater transparency on invoicing leads to fewer customer queries and fewer write-offs from your customer. So the more effective you can be about managing time, and both recording time at desk or remotely, the more effective you can be. Document management, another one, the ability to access documents anytime, anywhere. Paperless allows fee earners to be more effective, more profitable on the matters that they are working for, and can, you know, reduce that professional indemnity insurance as well, potentially. And speeding up of that casework, you know, those high volume tasks, those very repetitive tasks, there's efficiencies to be grabbed there, and it can reduce errors. So those things can make up that digital dividend. And it's probably worthwhile saying there, where's that sentence come from? To be honest, it's something that Advanced coined, and I've picked up on myself, and I've started to buy into that concept of, is that the same as an ROI in the software return that I have in my firm, or is that something different? It really comes down to, for me, I think that return that you have revenue-wise from all the investments that you make around efficiencies, software, technology. I'm just going to pick out a couple of these. And when you look at that concept of talent retention, there is so much out there these days. You could choose 101 different statistics to tell this story. And there was a couple that we'd found from actually just recruiters out there in the market. 4.8 months to hire a fee earner on average. That's to hire, not to get them billing. And that's terrifying if you think about the notice period, and then on top of building a client book and then actually billing beyond that. So that actual opportunity cost is huge. So retention is so important. And perhaps the phrase of choice would be, do you remember the sentence we all grew up with? It's so much more important to keep a client than win one, because it is cheaper to do that. It's easier to do that. Isn't that the same as keeping a member of staff? It's easier to keep a member of staff than perhaps hire a new one. We've also got a report that we produced last year called the Legal Trends Report, where we surveyed our customer base, and in the middle there, 40% of firms state that employee retention is their #1 priority. And I would be interested to see if my peers think that that's the same for themselves. I wonder if that's actually grown since the survey came out a year ago, if we were to do that again. So an awful lot to be said for that. And 52% said they were equally as productive as at home. We'll find out if the panel think that's the same for your respective firms and that balance of working from home or remotely. And a couple of points on that customer service piece. Now, we're all familiar with the concept of client portals. How many perhaps out there have actually reviewed the ROI you get from portals? So have you already invested in one, and have you looked at the ROI you've got from it? And if you haven't got that far yet, can you do that ROI based on how many emails you get in, how many phone calls you get in from your clients, and the time that takes? You can certainly do that ROI calculation. Culture, I think, is huge. It needs to be top down. It needs to be embedded into the organizational framework of the firm, and it needs to be cascaded through the firm. Otherwise, that customer advocacy just doesn't come through. The buy-in from your customer service client-facing team doesn't come through. So that's a culture. And perhaps another point at the bottom I'll just focus on for a moment, that continual investment in strategy. Look, software options have been out there for a long time in the market that we operate in. How many of those firms have actually surveyed your own customer base to see what they want from your firm? That's how you keep client retention, keep them happy, ask them what they want, and see if it's on your tech stack agenda. Couple more from me. So arguably, biggest digital dividend payoff is ensuring you have no revenue leakage or your billing is accurate. Wouldn't that be great if billing was accurate all the time? Time recording software obviously creates that transparent log for you, and perhaps more importantly, ensures that there's no write-off of those bills if it's in dispute. So, and the admin time that's associated to that. 10% written off after being disputed is a crazy stat, but it's something that we've seen again from our legal trends report. And 40% of firms looking to improve client communication to limit surprise bills. Nobody wants to get surprised, right? So ensuring that your mechanism for recording time allows the customer and communicates with the customer for accuracy is significantly important. And we've found from our own time recording software that we've been able to save, certainly some firms, up to 5.5 billable hours per month by introducing an effective time recording software, of which the advanced tool is Carpe Diem. And that's a huge bonus if you're looking to improve that digital dividend, save revenue leakage, and capture lost time. From an automation perspective, look, it's a competitive market, and the more effective you can be at automating high volume tasks, lower value tasks, I think improves, and I think inevitably improves margin per matter. So again, interested to get the panel's take on what types of automation you might have invested in yourselves and from the audience today. Certainly, hugely important for fixed fee work. I think we'd all probably agree. We found in our forms product that the ability to integrate the user-defined fields that populate from practice case management into a legal form can save up to 15 minutes of form, and from a high volume task that can be quite significant over weeks, months, years. So a clear ROI there. And a couple of others that I'll touch on. For those that operate within a practice or case management system, workflows can be produced that again make a very repeated task very error-free. It can be prone to errors if each person operates that task slightly differently. It provides that governance. And if you're lucky to have a case developer in your firm, you can absolutely do this yourselves with the right bit of training. So we'd absolutely encourage you to look at how automation on those repeated tasks within your practice case management system can support you. And client collaboration, the example I've got again is, we've seen on something as simple as a legal form, customers can absolutely populate the relevant fields that they need to back to that self-serve conversation, rather than having that busy fee and printing, emailing, getting information back, consolidating it, saving PDFs, etc. Why do that when you can have that populated from a client portal? So we've seen things like that add an awful lot of value. So moving on, as I start to wrap up, DMS can be, or document management can be, a huge lifesaver, and particularly if your job is very document heavy, you're working with complex matters, and our partner at NetDocuments, of which Kerri is on the call today, they've certainly found as much as 20% of the working week could be spent just looking for the files, not in the file, looking for those files because of how many weeks, months, years those particular matters might have been going on for. And it can be a minefield. So that can offer a huge amount of value. And often that fear factor about pursuing DMS can be one of data breach, which is a logical thing to think about, but a strong governance approach to data control can absolutely give the board and information security teams a lot of confidence to invest in those types of thinking. And a last one, we found some research from Liverpool John Moores University, and it had found, this is one example, it found a mid-market firm saved over £400,000 annually by going paperless. And obviously that consequence of combined costs of going paperless is, no storage or reduced storage and less office space needed, etc. And that reduced time spent on each matter. So if anyone's out there listening to what's that opportunity cost of going paperless, think about that. If you can save over 400k, it's got to be worth the investment in time to give it due course and attention. So that's my synopsis for further discussion, Caroline, and love to be able to share some of those sources with the audience if that's required.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. I don't know if you want to stop sharing just so that you can bring us all back into so our beautiful faces can come back into sharp relief.
Well,
that's fine then. I couldn't agree more on the sort of, the pressure on doing more for less. And to me, it's never really made an awful lot of sense, really, when you think, well, what should I be doing? What should I not be doing that I'm doing now? And actually, obviously, we know that technology can help you do it just faster. And I think it's really interesting, the focus of yours on ROI, because I do think that's something that sometimes we're lacking. And actually, it makes it so much easier for people to make the argument for investing. Do you think so? I want to bring it round to, I guess a lot of this will start with, start with the client. So to what extent do you think change, perhaps Steve or Kerri or Glenn, to what extent do you think clients are driving change? We talked about this more for less. We know that clients are increasingly demanding, but to what extent are their expectations driving change? Perhaps Steve, in your organisation, and perhaps could you give us an example?
Well, for us, since the pandemic, we have been client driven. Clients are asking us more and more for able to receive documents, forms sent to them at home, to sign electronically, to be sent back to us without the need of post. It speeds the process up, and as Glenn so rightly mentioned, trying to go paperless, we call it paper light, because I don't think we'll ever get rid of paper, especially not in a law firm. But what we do is we try to make sure that all documentation is sent electronically. We either use a portal, we use a data room, or we've just now invested in OEA forms to the cloud, which now gives us the ability to populate the form electronically in-house and then share it with the client. The client then receives this in a secure manner. Okay, they can finish the form, populate it, send it back to us, which we can then save it to our management system. It's quick, it's fast, it's easy, and again, there's no paper.
Yeah. Have you managed to, I appreciate it's probably quite early days, but have you worked out time savings yet? Is it possible to show ROI yet?
Honestly, I'd like to say yes, but I think given a couple of months, I reckon we're at least going to be saving at least 9, possibly 10%. Which is huge. It's a huge amount. We've already started to whittle down files. Beforehand, we used to have the traditional file that used to print a copy to the client, one for the file. That's stopping. So the files are becoming thinner, which means storage is becoming less important. So storage costs are being driven there as well, are coming down. So it is a massive knock-on effect throughout the entire process, making things electronic and getting AI involved as well, self-population, being able to get clients to do an MLO check at home to send you in photographs, ID, and so on and so on, identification. This is the way technology is going. You know, since COVID, we, as a typical law firm, we've had to accelerate our IT technology 4 years to basically 6 months.
There's been some benefits, haven't there? You wouldn't really want to be seen to be the one saying that, but there have certainly from a technology point of view. So I think it's interesting that, you know, Kerri, I know you've been doing a lot of sort of surveys. I think getting feedback from clients is so important. But do you think firms are like, and I'll come on to be more document management specific, and I know you've been doing some really interesting work around it, but do you think firms are engaging in that? Are they asking customers what they want and how they want it, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we've certainly heard feedback from our customers that particularly when it comes to winning new clients, it's actually being baked into the RFP process now. So it's almost an expectation that the firm will have technology that the client expects, and it will actually become a decision criteria in what type of firm that they want to work with going forwards. So to Steve's point, exactly, they're the ones that are really kind of driving the demands, and there is so much new technology evolving, you know, day in, day out at the moment that they can really choose with their feet. They've got so many firms at their fingertips they can work with, and the technology piece can become the real differentiator alongside the relationship piece, which I think, you know, we'll come on to talk about automation later, but that's where I see the real benefit of the automation piece is giving the lawyers back time to really build those deep relationships with their customers and providing value alongside the technology as well.
Yeah, and before I come on to sort of more people topic, I just wanted to say, so Glenn, we talked about, I think, so customer service, pleasing clients, it needs to be a boardroom topic. Do you think it is though? I think that you talked about culture, and I do personally think sometimes that one of the things that hasn't changed, this is coming from me, who I can be slightly more controversial, but I don't see, I'll be honest with you, an awful lot of change at the top level. Perhaps that's just me being cynical. But do you think customer service is now discussed? Is it a boardroom topic?
I think it's in pockets, Caroline. So I was lucky enough last year actually to be one of the panel judges at the LawNet conference, and one of the awards was for a certain market size, and part of the entry criteria was exactly that, your client-centric approach. And actually reading some of those entries, and it takes hours to go through them for anyone that's done judging before, you'll know this, the amount of effort that some of those firms have entered is really impressive. And the culture, you could see it start to top, bottom to top. But you could see in others it was a stretch, and they were looking for examples of where they've done this. So even from, you know, some firms would have, I forget the exact job title description, but like a client success director type role that wouldn't have been there quite some time ago. So I'm definitely seeing that in some examples. Is there a national statistic for that? Wouldn't that be a really useful survey actually to find out who's invested in that? Is it a boardroom KPI? I don't have the specific answer, but it's got to be something that we could survey. I've got one more perhaps example that I can share as well from a consumer perspective. So I'm going through a very small piece of conveyancing at the moment related to a family property.
Is this your anecdote, Glenn?
It is my anecdote, Caroline.
I'm glad that we got back to that, because it's going to ask you about your anecdote. So I'm glad you brought it up.
I'm only sharing it because, to be honest, it frustrated me a little bit. So I obviously won't mention the firm, but effectively it's just a piece of conveyancing, and this firm have no client portal. And the actual instruction letter that I received no more than about 3 or 4 days ago, it specifically asked not to contact the firm by email or phone to get an update on the matter. I couldn't believe it, actually. And it kind of frustrated me. It probably annoyed me a little bit as well. And if it were not for the family history and the familiarity with that part of the world, we probably would have walked elsewhere very quickly, because it's just crazy to think like that in a self-serve digital environment. Yeah. And I just wonder how many other customers have received that exact same instruction with that exact same paragraph that might have scared some customers away. And do other firms think like that? I think it's strange you're almost walking business out the door.
Yeah, I in recent experience, I've had quite the opposite, actually. Had a lovely verification app. One of the startups that I've written about, actually, which is really funny to see it in action. I was like, oh my God, I'm using this for verification. I mean, I think that's archaic. I don't know.
I think that answers your question, doesn't it, Caroline? But is that
Yeah.
a boardroom topic? And I think it's for some, but clearly the opposite end of the priority list for others.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think, I mean, so we're going to talk about people. So I think as I said at the beginning, people, I think we're getting better at understanding the people part of the whole change management thing, you know, like that people talk about technology. I think at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a lot of focus on technology, and perhaps actually way before probably the pandemic, thinking about, you know, before people were trying to slap technology on really awful data, that kind of time when we were going through with that. But I think we kind of evolved. I still think that the people part sometimes comes at the end. So I think it's great that we're talking about it. Now, I wanted to ask Kerri, because I know you've done some, I talked about your research, but do you want to run us through some of the sort of stats that you came across in terms of retention of talent?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, Glenn touched it on it at the beginning as to how important retention of staff is, and also attracting new talent as well. And one of the alarming facts that came out was 88% of top UK law firms are concerned that the shortage of talent will stop them from meeting their ambitions. So you think about, you know, we're talking about the competitive nature of the market, firms consolidating as well. And so this talent crisis really impeding people being able to achieve those firm goals. And that's because, you know, as again, one of the terms we've heard a lot, the great resignation of 2022, we're starting to see that come back around in a bit of a boomerang effect in 2023, but really with people being able to demand their own terms. Again, another really high number is 75% of those individuals will use technology as a deciding factor in what firm they're going to. And a lot of this is driven by, you know, the pandemic and people wishing to work from home, and so wanting access to technology that's going to meet them where they work and provide that seamless experience for them. But it's such a driving factor when it comes to actually attracting and again retaining that talent.
I find that fascinating. I mean, that point about that they would go to a firm and that they would be astute enough to kind of inquire about the sorts of technology or the sorts of arrangements that I mean, that's something really new, right? Like, so I used to be a lawyer, God, donkeys years ago, and obviously have written about the legal sector since a very long time ago. And this is not, I mean, Steve, is this something that you've come across in people? Would it occur to potential staff to come? Have you heard about this with your firm, saying what sort of arrangements do you have, I guess, for flexi working, etc.?
In the last 2 years, I've been amazed on how many people that wanted to work for GA have actually asked about technology, what we can provide, what technology we have. It's, as I said, I've never been asked it before till about 2 years ago, and now it's almost one of the third or fourth questions that we actually get asked.
Amazing. And is it to do with things like flexible working, or is there a sort of a particular thing that they're interested in terms of, I want to work with you because X?
Flexible working, I think, is the main one. I think now that people are used to working from home, they like the idea, but they like the process. They want to make things easy, fast and efficient.
Yeah, I also think that being joined up and having visibility, I think, and to taking away from this reliance on emails, you know, because there's so many things where if you're working at home and the firm doesn't have visibility of who's doing what, and you are relying on slightly more antiquated methods, and I think that, you know, people can get, you know, there's either people can have too much work, or they can get forgotten, or just the general you know, it becomes very inefficient and very stressful, I think, for people, you know. And I see that people are, a lot of firms are trying to encourage people to come back into the office some of the time, but I know that I think, did you find, Steve, am I right in thinking that you're not finding this, that staff are leaving? I know that I think Phil, if he was to have joined us, would have said that that one of the issues for him is like competing regionally in this sort of hybrid work, you know, that actually you've stopped, competing UK wide rather than just regionally. It's sort of opened up the talent pool. But are you finding that people are staying or not? More so
We're finding that people are staying. We're finding that people at the moment, with the uncertainty of the climate, you know, money, everything else, costs going up, that people are very reluctant to move.
Yeah.
And as regard the well-being, as we put it, we have to we've now brought in a new part of introduction, which is well-being. We have to make sure that people that are working from home are still regarded as a member of staff within the firm. Just because they're at home does not mean they're not an important part of the machine.
Yeah.
So, you know, we regularly have well-being meetings. We encourage people into the office at least twice a week. And again, Teams or Zoom, we make sure that we have continual conversations with employees to make sure they're not forgotten.
Yeah, I mean, this is really great. It's so different to the way it used to be. We don't night and day. Before we move on to, we're going to talk about automation. One of my favourite topics. Glenn, did you have anything to add on talent or no? I think you covered it quite nicely in your slides, to be honest with you.
I think I'd just be reinforcing the same points, actually.
Yeah.
But obviously, we're not coming from a law firm perspective, we're coming from a corporation perspective, but the trends are almost the same, I would say. Perhaps the only thing to add is I certainly hear it from our own staff, also from customers that we talk to, the millennial generation as they're coming through, because they grow up with that digital, social media, everything's online atmosphere. And everything in their life is self-service. They just grow up with that ability and expectation that everything's available for them in terms of a technology stack, and it's very easy to go and, you know, apply elsewhere given the demand for staff shortages. So it feels like a candidate-led market at the moment, and so they can choose with their feet.
Yeah, quite right. And actually, you know, I call it the Apple effect. You know, when people have technology that works and done, we're not technophobes. I don't think in the legal sector we're technophobes. I really don't. When, you know, you get when something works really nicely, like people actually really want to use it, they really see the benefits. I don't think that I think it's just, you know, that they need something, as you say, that matches their personal experience. So we have all of this efficiency in our personal life. Okay, well, let's talk about automation. I keep coming to you, Kerri, first, because you sent us all of these stats, but I'm going to do it again.
That's fine. I can be the stats individual.
You're my stat queen. You're like, so you did. I think it was your own, and I really thought these stats were really interesting. Actually, you did a white paper. It was from your white paper, wasn't it? In
Exactly.
terms of some of the savings in terms of automation, which I thought was quite interesting. So if you could kick us off on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing that came out of it was how much of a lawyer's time is, you know, automatable. And I think this is a topic of contention, right, in terms of where value is in terms of a lawyer's time. And I think when we're looking at things we're automating, particularly at NetDocuments and how we're advising our customers, it's automating those tasks that allow the firm to focus on those real value-adding tasks. So, you know, part of that comes from automation of administration, but the other piece as well comes from, you know, promoting within the firm the best documents, best approaches, best ways of doing things. And rather than that sitting with one lawyer, actually enabling your client base to experience that same level of service. And so seeing that as a differentiator as well. And, you know, from the survey that we did, around 70% of the firms that we spoke to are looking at automation in some way. And I use that some way purposefully there because it's a hot topic, it's a huge topic, but definitely what we're seeing is we're looking at firms looking at particular challenges that they're trying to solve with automation, and kind of picking it off piece by piece to introduce it slowly into the firm. But we're definitely hearing, particularly when we're talking to our IT teams, that it's something being driven from the fee earners back to them as well. So a real need within the firm.
Yeah, I would have thought so. Yeah, it feels like, you know, we as you said, we've been hybrid working for a while. It feels like we shouldn't, automation should not be a new conversation in any sense. Glenn, are you seeing, you know, if I'm always guilty perhaps because people talk about advances of assuming that everybody's doing more than they are. Have you seen sort of in terms of what are you seeing that people are doing in terms of the more interesting automation of the firms that you're working with?
The first thing that I'd add to this conversation is what I see in different firms is the level of relationship between the technology and IT department and the practice teams. Some are totally intertwined with very detailed requirements gathering. The annual needs analysis is there. It's really well prioritized. In others, it's a little bit like the IT team is available to consult and advise, but only if the practice areas come and talk to them, and never the two will often meet. So there was a conversation I had with a client that we facilitated a couple of weeks ago, and it felt like the two hadn't spoken together in a year, and they almost used that opportunity to broker, we could have done this for you a year ago, and by the way, we've been trying, but you didn't come and talk to us. We've tried to approach you. So yeah, it's almost like they're the internal management consultant for that process change, but hey, you've got to work together. So I'm sure perhaps Steve might vouch for that. You've got the forward thinkers and perhaps the laggards, depending on how they like to work. But again, it's got to be top down. If you want to innovate, think differently, you've got to encourage adoption of change and such.
Steve, would you, oh, sorry, I think,
no, please.
Were you going to ask, so Steve, what do you think?
I completely agree. I completely agree. You know, beforehand, we used to almost lead with ideas, automation, and a lot of the time it was upon deaf ears. Now, you know, we're being led from the top, which is the way it should be. And, you know, that there's a lot of technology out there that we can embrace and introduce, which people can use. So, yeah, I completely agree with them.
Do you know what, I didn't ask, so I think if you want to ask a question, please do. So I think we can just jump in on here. So someone said, and this was ahead of the panel actually, so they've sent this in advance. I'm interested in whether the guests feel that the competent use of technology is a factor in client and staff satisfaction and ultimately profit generation and retention. I didn't answer it straight away because although we were talking about clients, we weren't going on to sort of talk about profit generation and retention. But actually, why don't we just address it now? And then if anybody else listening in has got any questions, then please do post them in the chat. Did anyone have any thoughts? Have we covered everything there? Do you think? Perhaps Glenn, do you want to answer?
I think we've certainly touched on it, Caroline, and the couple of stats that I shared earlier on, so maybe the stats king, not the stats queen, was, I mean, that 4.8 months to recruit a new member of the team if you're a fee earner, that opportunity cost is significant. So part of that question is, does that does that client retention, staff retention, also ultimately impact profit generation retention? 100%. If staff is satisfied, they won't leave, and that got to impact both top line and bottom line ultimately. And I think the client, we've covered that to a degree, isn't it? That they just expect to be able to self-serve, and if they don't, it's simply they will leave. I think the most proactive thing that I would talk to when I'm speaking to clients is, have you actually surveyed your customer base? You know, is that part of your KYC form, for example, or your onboarding form, I should say? And it's easily done. You know, it's just get the sentiments of your own client base, and that will help you both retain, but also cross-sell.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear Kerri's observations in terms of that being a requirement. Let's talk about, in terms of profit generation, obviously that kind of brings us on as well to time recording it, but in a certain sense, in terms of we're coming down to the numbers. So, or time management. I know that, So I used to hate time recording, and it's interesting in terms of, I think this really links to fee earner happiness as well. I think efficiency and having more efficiency around time recording must lead to better retention. I haven't actually found any stats around this. Perhaps Kerri can share this with us, but I think that it's such an arduous task, and I think if you have to spend less time doing time recording, everybody hates it. This is the reason why some people go in-house. I think that you'll have a happier workforce. But Steve, in terms of you know, how you're leveraging technology to improve some of the points that Glenn was touching on, have you got any observations in terms of things that you've done that have been successful?
We feel lots of things, actually. We've again, beforehand, documents used to be generated by a copier, stapled together, put in the post. You know, that was probably 5 years ago. Now, you know, due to COVID, I know I keep mentioning it, but due to COVID, you know, electronic bundles has been a very big part. Courts almost encourage electronic bundles now. So that's an area that we had to look into. But we found that since we've started doing that, staff have been a lot happier, a lot quicker. So obviously profit's going to go up. Comes to forms, as previously mentioned, we used to use OEA forms, which was fine. Very, very difficult to share. We had to send it to clients in the post. They had to sign, fill them out, send them back to us. Now with electronic forms, OEA forms in the cloud, this is now done electronically. It's quick, it's efficient, and you get a very quick response. And clients like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Glenn, I know you've talked about in terms of coming back to your theme of the digital dividend, I think that you've talked about one, and I think it'd be great if you could expand. You did talk about this, but obviously slightly briefly in part of your slide. So you're saying that you said that arguably the biggest digital dividend payoff is ensuring you have no revenue leakage and that your billing is accurate.
Well, you know, there's so many different forms of technology that fee earners use these days that weren't there a few years ago. Teams is a really obvious example, but obviously, you know, Apple and Apple Watches and all sorts, there's different ways now that fee earners interact with the customer or, you know, might record time on. So Teams being the biggest one, how many customers would you have a Teams meeting with in a given day, in a given week? If you don't have the ability or the time to record the time actively for whatever reason, or it's a personal choice, you do it the next day or the day after or the following week. And that ability to retrospectively capture your time and not miss anything is all coming down to the integration between the tools that you use for communication every day and the tool that you use to capture time in. So, you know, telephony records, mobile, desktop, or Teams, really good example, even Apple, a more recent one. These are all relatively easy integrations with tools like Carpe, and I suspect others as well. But it's a huge thing that we would get in, to Kerri's point, these are standard RFP questions now that we would receive. They're standard ways of working over and above what our own practice and case management systems might have had in the day with regard to retrospective, but also mobile-based time recording as well. So that's what the benefit of a Carpe Diem has over and above a PCMS system. Mobile's a huge one, Caroline. You know, if you're busy and you're out on the road, but you want to record time there and then, you know, we've invested hard in things like natural language processing capability. So, you know, speaking to the mobile app and say, record 1 hour of time to case ABC, and it can go through back into the time recording app and then straight into your PCMS system, whatever that system might be. Things have moved on quite a lot. And again, fee earners just demand more options to be able to record time, whether it's live there and then, retrospectively or otherwise. And so mobile's a huge part of that, and we've had to invest in and successfully done so quite recently. So, you know, it used to be one where you might say, unique time recording was more of a large law thing because of the variety and complexity of tasks and practice areas. That's not the case. Actually, our growth area these days is more in that mid-market who have seen different ways of working in the expansion of choice from those fee earners in that mid-market space.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. It's again coming back to just the automation so that it doesn't get lost, it doesn't, or there's absolutely no need now for, when you're out and about, it's impossible to try and remember, and actually it takes so much time trying to piece together, and there's no need to do it. Should we come on to, I think I don't want to, I'm conscious of time. We probably won't go to the full hour, but I think if we can come on to, unless anyone's got anything more to add on automation, I'd be really interested to talk about document management, which obviously is one of the key areas that law firms are looking to in order to increase efficiency, so the lifeblood of the organisation. Did anyone have anything? Have I forgotten anything on automation, or can I come to Kerri to talk about future-proofing your tech stack? All good. Kerri.
Brilliant.
So here it's amazing that we've not talked about AI. Well, actually, I think we did touch briefly on AI.
Yeah.
Normally, in most of the conversations I have these days, AI is just like every third word, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But, so it's quite a relief, but obviously it is playing a huge part. I know you're going to talk about automation as well within the context of the document management system. So talk me through some of your thoughts in terms of obviously the market for collaboration technology has grown exponentially over the last few years. Tell me more about what you're seeing from a customer perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. As you mentioned, Caroline, there's been exponential growth in that space. And I think if you look about the decisions that people were making 3 years ago on their tech stack compared to now, compared to another 3 years' time, we just cannot predict the conversations that we may be having in 3 years' time. AI, for example, whilst has existed for years, it seems to have exploded when it comes to legal tech over the past few months, and the uses of that in firms as well. So a big piece for us when we're talking to customers is really looking at long-term goals of a firm and making sure that they're making technology decisions that are future-proof. So, not only understanding what meets the needs of the firm today, but really trying to tap into our vision at NetDocuments, for example, and how that aligns to the firm's vision as well. What does our roadmap look like? How are we thinking about AI? How are we thinking about automation? Because effectively over the next year, this is going to become prevalent in everyday work, and the firm wants to make sure they're making the right decision for future needs as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know. So yeah. So I think I was interested in Glenn's point about fear of data breach. Glenn, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit more?
I would, and I'd invite Kerri to join in as well. But it's natural that if you're looking for anything that's cloud and cloud native, just to go through that due diligence of where's my data stored, etc. But the reality is it's all overcome with really strong governance around controls and the measures that are built into the software, and NetDocuments have never had that single breach, which we're really pleased to partner with them on as our DMS partner of choice. It's just you want to know that your data, your customer data, is in the most safest, secure place while still having that best of breed functionality on top of it, and that's exactly what NetDocuments are able to support. And perhaps I'd invite Kerri to offer anything on top of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And we expect these conversations to happen now with our customers, and almost welcome them as well, because we really want to build confidence in our platform, just not now, but also in the evolution of it as well. So it's become commonplace that we would have these discussions with customers day in, day out.
Do you think, though, I mean, it's interesting, so with the cloud, so we did a research project, report where we looked at the progression to cloud, and again, going back to the pandemic, obviously that changed views, accelerated it, if nothing else. Is this still a conversation? I'm just interested, is this still a conversation in terms of it being a cloud system? So is it the case that they might fear that there might be, I think people personally, the people I speak to are quite sophisticated now. It's interesting, they very much understand that things are more secure in the cloud. That's a big, huge generalization, but you know what I mean, rather than in your own premises. Is this still a conversation that you're having?
Not around the cloud. Like we're definitely seeing the same things you're seeing there in terms of the pandemic really driving that conversation forward. I think this is more just around confidence that the data is in safe hands. with that provider as well. So we're definitely not having the discussions with people around, you know, why cloud versus on-premise anymore, but it really is around building confidence in the cloud, the handling of the data, and the evolution of the platform and what that will look like as well.
Yeah. To what extent, Steve, to what extent are you've talked about automating forms, you've talked about your case management system, you know, to what extent are you looking to create a sort of and able to create sort of end-to-end automation across the firm, and what part would the DMS play in that?
Well, again, going on what Kerri said then, you know, the cloud, that's not a conversation that people have anymore. It is the security, it is who you're going with, and it's making sure that the governance is there for the cloud. For us, we needed to make sure that we can start automating the general use of the whole system, going from digital dictation through to document creation, document sharing, large file sharing as well, which is a big problem that people have, sharing very large files in data rooms. So it's getting all that integrated into one big package, workflows as well. So it's streamlining the system and making life easier for A, the client, but B, also the staff, because we keep saying staff retention is very important.
Yeah. Do you see, I've seen so many, you know, super clever, you know, I guess we'd call it RPA, but you know, you obviously can eliminate so many stages when you do the full end-to-end automation with the workflow. The time savings, as some of which Glenn already touched on, are huge. Do you still have to have those conversations going back to retention? Does it worry people, or are we past that in terms of, you know, do people see it as, hey, this is great, you know, I've got a firm that's really sophisticated, that they've created this great workflow where it eliminates a lot of the really boring stuff that I'm doing? Or are you still having conversations with people talking about, you know, job security and that kind of thing?
We once had somebody mention, when we started bringing in workflows, we had somebody mention the word de-skilling.
Okay.
And I said, elaborate, what do you mean? They said, well, if it's a workflow and it's a tick box exercise, anybody can tick a box. So from end to end, a tick box exercise, you don't need to be skillful. My answer to that was, well, you need to understand why you're ticking the box.
Right.
Is it right to tick the box? You do need, you know, you do still need skill level to work a workflow. It isn't just an automated process. There's still there's the fear now. The lawyer is still definitely required to work a workflow. Yeah,
no, 100%. Glenn, did you before we wrap up, did you have any sort of final observations on anything that we've discussed, or anything that you want to share?
I'll just add to Steve's point for a moment there. As much as I would love to advertise it, I think it's unlikely that you can build a workflow for everything, right? Your client engagement will always have more than one party. You can never replicate that for every step. I think it comes back to that digital dividend comment about where are your most high volume repeated margin improvements that you can make, and go and speak to your practice areas about, you know, how can I take 70 or 80% of that into an automated environment? And that's the difference between surviving and thriving. And I think that's the role that we all play aboard when we're outlaying strategy. You know, in terms of, like, you know, kind of my 2 cents wrap up comments, I think I completely buy into the concept that people are the power in these firms. You've got to retain, and in many ways that's your biggest ammunition in your bow that you can control. I think it's culture-led, as I've said before. That isn't a word that we've maybe grown up with in the legal space. You know, culture of strategy and your tech stack is often been with the CTO, with the IT department, but it's a board strategy and everyone's got to believe in it. And it's not the de-skilling comment that Steve's just mentioned there. So, you know, I think there's many things that make up that digital dividend. I think together we've summarized quite a few, but it's not going to go anywhere. And if anything, it's going to come a bit more margin pressurized. So we've got to keep finding the most innovative ways to make those marginal gains. The thing that I'd maybe just add briefly is you don't need to automate everything tomorrow. You don't do everything at once necessarily. Prioritize the the gains that you need in the firm. And that can come, as I've said before, from working between departments about where those high value repeated tasks can be.
Yeah, it's about, did you see I just jumped there through? If you think I'm going mad or just something, it's about understanding what you do, isn't it, as well? It's about having a really good understanding of how the business works and the bits where it makes sense to, like you say, you know, there's no pressure to automate everything at all, but it's understanding what you do, how you do it, getting the cultural buy-in from the top, and then putting in place the most efficient processes. I think that we've covered, as you said, some really interesting ground. It's great to have those stats. Kerri, thank you. Steve, thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And Glenn, I think that was a really helpful introduction and obviously conversation throughout. So thank you very much for listening in. Thank you to those of you listening to the recording. And if you want to get in touch, we can share some contact details with you as we share the recording. And it's really nice to chat to you all today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.